Attention, please. Eastern Airlines Flight 19, now ready for departure.
Welcome aboard the Walt Disney World Express monorail. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're entering the vacation kingdom of the world.
There's enough land here to hold all the ideas and plans we could possibly imagine. We call it Epcot. Will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow.
Welcome to another episode of the Retro Disney World Podcast, taking you back to the vacation kingdom of the world, the way it was, and the way it is in your memories.
Welcome to another episode of the Retro Disney World Podcast. This is episode 36, Polynesian Dreams. I'm your host, Todd McCartney, and tonight we'll be taking you back to the development and thought behind the Polynesian Resort. This is actually part one of a two-part series on the Polynesian Resort, because we know there's so much to talk about, and so many of you have fond memories of that and really want to dive into all the details. But before we get to that, as always, sitting in with me tonight on this cold end of a blizzard we're having here in New Hampshire is Mr. JT Kuja from Ohio. Any snow out there, JT? Anything?
Just frigid temps. We're in the single digits, but not a lot of snow. So we're hanging in there.
All right. We got about another 12 inches today on top of the 6 or 7 we already had. So
we could lose you at any time.
If the lights flicker, I'm gone.
How's gonna
until I get out there and get the generator going. So sitting in his shorts, probably, in a nice green short sleeve shirt from Tampa, Florida, Mr. Hal Bowers. How are you this evening, Hal?
Tonight, I get to really give a real solid aloha.
There we are.
Tonight is the episode. Doing well. It's 50 degrees here in Tampa, so it's cold, but not as cold as it is in other places. Yep. So
now, Hal, you've been preparing for this episode probably for about 9.5 years, maybe.
Yeah, all my life.
Yeah,
probably.
So
my entire life.
No, I'll tell you, it's been a good solid 3-4 days because there's some things I wanted to get into. I wanted to put an order in my head for myself, development-wise, because it's had such a weird, interesting development. So it's been a pretty solid research week for me.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to it. And from the city of brotherly love is Mr. Brian P. Miles, where the Christmas decorations are probably starting to come down. Brian, are we?
I took the first few things down, but they stay up until the Feast of the Three Kings, the Epiphany, which is this Saturday. So right. Happy New Year from the city of brotherly love to all of our listeners and all of you fellas.
Thank you very much, Brian. Yeah, Happy New Year to everybody. So let's get this episode kicked off. And as always, we go into comments and corrections and making sure that we've got things right. So last month, Brian, you had mentioned the first song that Andrew McArdle sang was from the Broadway show Cats, called Memory. But
yes.
That hadn't debuted into 1981, so we did a little bit of digging, and this person was correct. The song was actually The Way We Were from the 1973 film of the same name.
That's right. And the opening line is Memories.
Right.
So that was where the confusion came from. We got a lot of stuff like 85% correct as we're trying to talk about 70s theater in that episode.
There was a whole section we cut out where we were completely down on Andrew Lloyd Webber hole or something. It's just wrong. So we admit. So appreciate Ben West for writing in and making that correction there.
I do also want to thank all of the people who tweeted and Facebooked and messaged us in some form of communication to let us know that they agreed they wanted to wash their eyes out with something after having subjected themselves to watching that Christmas special.
The best tweet,
eye wash.
I forget who it was from, but the best tweet, I believe it was Christmas Day. Somebody said, "I'm subjecting my family to this," and there's a picture of like 4 of them crowded around the large screen TV, and on it is Shields and Yarnell, and the rest of the family just looked all glaze-eyed. It was
it's probably a delight to watch it with our director's commentary of running through it at certain points. Maybe somebody can edit that special together.
We should do
dropping in our commentary.
Yeah, if not, maybe next year what we'll do is we'll do a riff track version and release that.
That would be fun.
Wouldn't that be great? Just we'll just get a bowl of popcorn and some drinks and just see what happens. Then you can imagine like little JT's head, all sitting there with the earphones on in front of the television, right?
That'd be perfect.
That's right. All right. So Ben, thanks to you for writing in, and as well as everybody else who wrote in about last month's episode. I know we rag on a lot of those television specials, and for their time, they were, what people wanted, but they certainly give us a good chuckle nowadays. All right, so the next item here we have is how you've uncovered some really detailed information about the Japan Pavilion. And while I know we're going to probably dig into a deeper what never became of World Showcase, pavilions such as Africa and the famed German Rhine cruise and all that, but you uncovered some really interesting information about the 2-level Meet the World Pavilion.
This was a really neat find, and again, we have to shout out to Ted Linhart and his DisneyDocs.net.
Our biggest fan.
Yeah, he has. To describe who Ted is like he is a fan, but he is a fan with a bank account. And when some rare documentation comes up for auction, as it recently did with a bunch of items that once belonged to Harper Goff, Ted opened up the purse strings and made a lot of purchases at the auction. But the really great thing that he does is he takes photos of everything and he puts it on his website, so you can actually go through his stuff and see what's what. So in the process of just trying to get my facts straight for this episode, I started going through his site, and lo and behold, there was a diagram there for the mythical Meet the World show, which we've always heard was supposed to run as part of the Japan Pavilion in the castle, behind the main area. So if you were going by today's standards, this would be kind of where the cute display is, the kawaii.
Right. If you go past the department store on your right, there's a bridge across a body of water. It's almost like a moat around the castle.
That's it.
And so that would have been the entrance to where the ride was.
So what we found out, we'd always thought like, oh, it must have been like a carousel. We knew it was a carousel theater. I think we probably kind of knew that the concept was that the stages were on the outside and the carousel was in the center. But we heard all kinds of wild stories and rumors, like the building was built like 2 feet too small, so they couldn't put the thing in it, and that's why they never opened it. But in this pile of documents was a very detailed layout, and the surprising thing that we found out that the carousel show was actually intended to be on the second floor in that building. Now that building was actually built, and it's used as a woodworking shop. It has been since 1982. So the actual the show building was constructed but never used for the show. In front of the way that this layout is set up, the way that the thing would have worked is that there would have been an additional smaller building kind of in front of that castle thing, and it would have had stairs in it. So you could have come up the stairs to go up to the second floor and then walk across a second bridge on top of the one that you walk across today to go over that moat. And I actually looked and found an old, Epcot postcard of concept art, and you can actually see this second floor bridge like in that artwork, which just kills me because we've had this stuff in front of us for years and we just didn't know what we were looking at, and it was there the entire time. You could also follow the grade around the five-sided pagoda and up by the little restaurant up there, and you would have been able to approach it from that side too. So if you're a wheelchair or you just wanted to take a ramp to get up there, you could have done it that way. So you would enter the pre-show up on the second floor, kind of in that same location, but one floor up from where the cute exhibit is, and then you would go into the show, which was the full Meet the World show, similar to what ran, well, actually exactly what ran at Tokyo Disneyland, but in English. And then when you go into the exit area, it was supposed to look like Ginza at night. And you would then go sort of down a couple of grades, probably to a staircase or some kind of ramp to go underneath the ride. And underneath the ride, they had exhibits space set up for like JAL Airlines and what would become Panasonic. I can't remember the name of the company now. It's like Mitsutake or something. I blew that one. But there'd be exhibit displays for what I assume would be the sponsors that would have sponsored the show that was upstairs. And based on all of this, the conclusion that I can now come to, because we know that the figures and the sets and stuff for Meet the World were actually built in Florida in central shops at the same time that a bunch of other construction was going on. So I think they had great thoughts about how they could go and get sponsors for the show, and the thing just fell through. And I believe the story is that the person that sponsored it in Japan, and I can't remember who it was now, which is going to kill me. It was one of the leaders of Mitsubishi or something. Was a Japanese history buff, and he wanted a show similar to the Hall of Presidents in Japan. So they basically took it, and he sponsored it, so they shipped it over to Japan and installed it in Tokyo Disneyland. There was a thought that they would build 2 of them, but probably just from a money thing, and with Epcot trying to get finished in time, I think they just decided to drop it, and that's kind of how it faded away.
So none of those props were actually in Dreamflight, that little Japanese sequence, right?
No, but they probably did a lot of research.
Yeah, they probably had
during that time period, so they probably had some stuff to pull on.
All right, well, thanks for that, Hal. And JT, let's run out to the listener mailbag. What do we got in there this month?
All right. Well, pretty good month on the mail here. First one's from Brian Elias. He says, "Hey all, just want to say that I love the podcast and it makes my day when a new episode pops up into his feed. I know the feeling, Brian, not in the show with ours, but with others. I know what you're saying."
I like the feeling that it pops up because I know my edits are done for the month.
That's true. I guess you have that, yeah. He says, "Had a couple questions for you that I'd love to get answered if you have the time." Of course we do. He's been curious about the future core that used to walk around Epcot. As a former trumpet player, I was always really impressed by these guys, but only had vague memories of seeing them perform. He'd love to know more about them and what ultimately led to them going away. I literally have never heard of it. I've heard of it, but I don't know what this is. So what do you guys got on the future core?
Well, it was a marching band, and it was a marching band because while Disney had built theme parks before Epcot, it had built Magic Kingdom style theme parks, and they all had marching bands. So naturally, some of what they did when they opened up Epcot was just take things they knew how to do and apply them to their new park. And in this case, in the new park, it was a band that had not particularly futuristic looking uniforms, but different uniforms from the Main Street marching band, and they marched around Future World. In fact, one of our earliest film footages of Epcot that we have has some shots of them marching by near Spaceship Earth.
Yeah, right under Gateway Gifts, I believe, right now.
Yeah.
Oh boy, okay, so it was just a...
Howard probably got to see them up close and personal a few times.
I think I have some video in '86, too, of them playing with it. Really, really great band.
They were there for years, a very, very long time. They actually released a CD under the name N-Corps that you could get locally in Orlando. They couldn't sell it at... I don't know if they ever sold it at the park, but I think they sold the CD called the Future of Corpse. So they actually have a website still. You can go to futurecorpse.net. Oh no, you can't. It's dead. Never mind. Forget it.
Dead like the future core.
Yes. Anyways, they were active from December 1st of 1982 to May 13th of 2006. So they were there a really, really long time.
Seriously,
and I'm sure
that long?
Yeah, and I'm sure members came in and out as times went on.
Boy, they could have been right up there with the mariachi band.
Yeah, they were a staple. They were really famous. I think the thing that really separated them from other, just marching band ensembles is they used a lot of jazz in their sound. So they would do like some of their very famous things. They did a great version of the Jetsons theme song. And they do like Birdland and a lot of jazz standards. So that was a little different from, I guess your typical like small marching band.
Some of their music is ingrained in my head because I remember that the video my dad took in 1986 just had some great stuff on. My dad was a drummer, so he got a kick out of watching the drum line, and I know he videotaped a lot of it. Pretty cool stuff. So
yeah, even now when we went to do our tour through Epcot, they had not them, but like a very similar band, because I remember we were trying to talk and all of a sudden it was like and then we actually had to wait for them to finish before we could say anything.
Exactly.
Well, but I also remember back then, I don't believe there were any stages in Future World.
Yeah, that's true.
They eventually now convert part of the fountain area to the Christmas time stage and that's kind of become a permanent stage.
On top of it, don't forget with the crowds that you used to see at Epcot, everybody was waiting outside with no entertainment. So having them run around from pavilion to pavilion and play a little music was certainly very welcome.
Sure.
So what else we got there, JT?
Well, adding on to Brian's email, I thought this was fitting. He said he's kind of in the mood for a Holy Grail video to come out, and he wants to know about the Wave Machine footage.
All right. Well, we released a Holy Grail video today, not the Wave Machine, but we had a really interesting piece of film, actually. The first thing on it was a photo shoot that the Ford Motor Company did at Walt Disney World. Now, normally you'd think it's not that interesting, but when we lined up some of the scenes of this film of them doing the photo shoot, they're nearly identical in a couple shots to what was actually in the advertisements that ran in magazines. So it's a really, really cool piece. After that day was done, whoever did this photo shoot took the camera into the park and into the Magic Kingdom, and on his way out or on his way in, I forget exactly where, he shot footage of the Eastern Winds Chinese junk that used to sail from the Polynesian, and it was cruising right along right in front of the entrance to the Magic Kingdom. So we'd love to get some on ship footage of it sailing, but here it certainly is a piece of footage of it moving under its own power, which is really cool.
And as far as we know, it's the only footage out there so far
of anything.
Certainly nothing that Disney ever put out had it on it.
Right.
So we'll see.
Now, in terms of the Holy Grail of the Wave Machine in action, that certainly is a Holy Grail. I will just say that we are working on some leads. No promises, but we're going to do what we can.
I think it's fair to say, because I think we shared some of it, but maybe not all of it, between the last Destination D or the one before it, and then the first-hand stories of people we've talked to that have been a part of it, and the bits of it that have ended up in books. We've got a pretty comprehensive knowledge of the Wave Machine and when it operated and why it was put there, and plans to expand it and create a water park next to where the Polynesians, or rather where the Grand Floridians wedding pavilion is now. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. The only missing piece right now is the footage of it, and once we have that, there'll be might be a little Wave Machine mini episode or something.
There we go. And if you're sorry that the Wave Machine's gone, you still have it, because what it became was Typhoon Lagoon. So
yeah, a lot of the concepts around developing it were moved into Typhoon Lagoon,
exactly.
And the wave pool that exists there.
That's right. So Brian, thanks for writing in, and we'll let you know when we got that next Holy Grail ready.
For sure. Thanks, Brian. All right. Next message we got was from Gary. He says, "Hi guys, not exactly park related, but I was wondering if you had any info about Epcot magazine. I may have appeared on it as a child, but never got to see it. My family even subscribed to the Disney Channel once. We were able to get that in our area, but it was too late. I've seen intros and small videos on YouTube. Have you seen the show? Know much about it? Keep up the good work, Gary."
Hello, Gary. So Epcot magazine was a daily digest, half an hour or an hour, depending on when you were watching it and when it was running, that ran on the Disney Channel from the day the channel went on the air. It was one of the first programs until 1986. So it ran from 1983 to 1986. At that time, Disney Channel was a pay channel. It was not included in your basic cable packages. You had to subscribe every month to it like you did with HBO or something like that. It was hosted by a guy named Michael Young, who would be known to some of our listeners as the host of Kids Are People 2, which was his job immediately before he did Epcot Magazine for 3 years for the Disney Corporation. So we don't have a library of them available to us. We don't have your specific episode, if you even knew what it was, but we do have behind the scenes footage on one of our very own films.
So the film that Michael Young appears in that we restored was called, the article is called Come Visit the Epcot Center of 1982. And he appears around the 3-minute mark, just around 3:01, 3:02, somewhere in there. You can take a look at. And the narrator of the film, whoever put this together, was an amateur photographer put this together, but the narrator even calls it out that it was Michael Young filming something there, and you can kind of see some of the cameras and other equipment and stuff. So kind of a neat little thing there. So
yeah. So I'll give you some of the behind the scenes story of like how the show came together. So Disney Channel was looking to program. It's like they originally ran, I think, something like 16 hours of programming a day. So despite that there was stuff that was in the vault, there was also a need for some original content to run on the channel as well. So there were things like, there was a Winnie the Pooh show and like Dumbo Circus. There were a couple like live action things that they made. There were plans for a Dreamfinder show, but unfortunately that never happened. But someone got the idea to do this Epcot Magazine show. And I think what happened is the show was created by a company called Bill Hiller Productions. And for those of you who kind of remember the 1970s and the 1980s, I've actually talked about this show before. He was actually a TV executive, and he created a show called PM Magazine. When the U.S. actually deregulated network television, Brian, here's another deregulation story, they actually forced the local stations to be able to get the 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock hour back,
Yes.
where the major networks had taken that on. So the networks were looking for programming to put in there, like game shows. So like that's when Wheel of Fortune made the shift from like a daytime show until an evening show. But there was also this innovation in video recording for news gathering, because before everything was done with film. So suddenly now production could be a lot cheaper because videotape existed. And what this guy did is he was working for a company called Group W Productions, and he figured if I got a bunch of different stations together in different markets like Baltimore and Boston and San Francisco, and Philadelphia was one, and each had them do like little 10 or 15 minutes, or maybe 7-minute segments. It's like he could batch those together and send them all out to run nightly on all of the markets that were part of this thing. So he got this little syndication network together, and he had basically you could sign on as a station to either just run the program or provide content for it too. So people like Matt Lauer and Nancy Glass and Lisa Gibbons and Tom Bergeron got their start on PM Magazine doing bits for this. And that's where they kind of cut their teeth when they were in their 20s. So this Bill Hiller guy ran this very successfully for a couple of years and made Group W a boatload of money, and I think wanted to get a little bigger piece of the pie from them. And so he asked for more, and they were like, nah. So he quit, and then he started his own production company and basically tried to replicate the same model of content that was done on PM Magazine on Epcot Magazine. So they do segments on fashion and cooking and all that stuff. It was all filmed at Epcot, but it was basically one of those sort of like evening news magazine type shows that were very popular until things like Entertainment Tonight and more of the like entertainment news came into vogue in the late 80s, and that kind of knocked that all out. So that's kind of the story of I think how it happened and who was behind that. Oh, and one thing that I forgot Bill Hiller did after Epcot Magazine. Do you guys remember Wink Martindale and his game shows?
Oh
Yeah, of course, tic-tac-toe.
Tic-tac-toe. So that show was done as a partnership between Wink Martindale and Bill Hiller. So Tic-Tac-Toe and Trivial Pursuit and Boggle and Jumble and all those like game shows that were from them together.
And Wink Martindale actually talked about Bill Hiller in his episode that he did of the Gilbert Gottfried podcast. He talked about his history in production and things like that, and his friendship with Elvis. He was very good friends with Elvis Presley from when they both started out in Memphis, and really fascinating guy. Very fascinating guy.
All right. Well, thank you for all the insight on that. Thank you, Gary, for your message. We had a few others, but in the interest of time, we'll save them, see if we can get to them next month. And, of course, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you want to be read on the air, podcast at retrowdw.com, or you can send us a direct message on any social media. Brian?
And I just feel like, as an asterisk, I have to add for the Philadelphia area listeners, yes, PM Magazine and Philadelphia's Evening Magazine came from the same place. Ray Murray, who hosted Evening Magazine in Philadelphia from 79 to 92, was the original host of PM Magazine when it started in 1977. So don't confuse the two. They came from the same genesis, same type of program.
There we go.
All right, so that will seal up the mailbag like a big Ziploc, and we are moving on.
That's right. It's time for this month's Audio Rewind. Boy, guys, we had a lot of people write in. A lot of people got this one correct. Did we all know it?
No,
I did know it.
No, I didn't.
You didn't know it, JT.
I only read that once.
So disappointing,
Oh,
JT.
man. You wrote it? Did it actually move when you were on it?
You
Because
know
it
what I
never
mean.
moved for me.
It was a ride
Well,
to me because I was about
it was a
8 when I went
ride.
there.
Well, I consider it an attraction, JT, but let's take a listen to last month's Audio Rewind.
Gee, it sure is dark in here. There's gotta be a light around here somewhere.
All right, so if you guessed Cranium Command, you are correct. That was the first couple words that Buzzy says as you're sitting in the dark, and it just starts the attraction, starts the show. So congratulations to Lauren Sleepek. She is the winner this month. You'll be receiving the Christmas Favorites album that Brian put into the prize pot. So we'll be sending that out your way. So thanks a lot for writing in, Lauren, and congratulations. All right, so we need a prize for this month, and Hal, you've got something you're throwing in there, right?
Yes, absolutely. I have a lovely issue of Eyes and Ears of Walt Disney World, the cast member magazine. This one is dated July 19th, 1975, volume 5, number 29, in case you're, have a little cheat sheet at home. But the cool thing about this one, it's when they unveiled the plans for Epcot and World Showcase. Now, this isn't the Epcot and World Showcase that we know. This is the version that sort of was to exist off next to Bay Lake, where World Showcase was actually a separate facility from the other thing. So there's some nice pictures inside of like the Japanese pavilion that would take guests on a bullet train, and some nice art of the Great Britain pavilion, and all kinds of cool stuff like that. So
Cool. All right. So you can win that if you know the answer to this month's Audio Rewind. If you think you know the answer to this month's Audio Rerun, send your guesses to podcast@retrowdw.com. All correct answers will be entered into a random drawing. For the winner, all entries should be received by February 4th, 2018.
Hey, look at this. There's even a picture of someone surfing on the wave machine in here.
Oh, that's perfect. Perfect
Wait
timing.
a second. That's kind of a. I've read about this. That's kind of like one of the. I don't want to say a holy grail, but that's sort of like one where people were like, "Yeah, it's featured in this Eyes and Ears about the wave machine."
Yeah,
and that's a picture I've never seen before. Have you?
Well, I guess because it's in my hand. But
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I'll scan
Scan that.
I
in.
will,
Like, that's
I will
something I've,
scan
like,
this and we'll
searched
send it
for.
out for everyone.
Yeah.
Like
put
I
that
almost
in
bought like a ton of Eyes and Ears to get that picture.
Oh,
There we go.
Well,
Look at that.
well, you should enter the contest, JT.
yeah, enter
Guess
JT. Let's see
correctly.
if you win next month.
Yeah.
I don't even know what it is.
We haven't even made it yet. No. All right, so we need an item to add to the prize pot. We're doing that again. We're going to do a drawing in June and in December. So, JT, what did we add to the prize pot last month?
First thing I have, and it's a short list, obviously, Epcot posters.
You got it. So we're going to throw in a embroidered retro WDW hat. Putting that into the mix.
Is that a retro WDW hat? Or
yeah.
like one of the new ones. Okay.
Yeah, and we're putting in something here. This is really cool. We're going to put one in both of the prize pots for the June and the December. But this is from Reese Miles. She made a McFarkle family Christmas card. So we're going to throw one of those in, which was absolutely awesome card. So we're going to put that in the prize pot. So if you've been following us and you like the McFarkles, and it's great. The McFarkles are sitting in the Carousel of Progress. The oven is on fire. It's terrific. So
that was by far my favorite Christmas card of this year. That was such a delight to get.
Absolutely brilliant. So thank you, Reese, and your item is in the prize pot. So again, if you think you know the answer to this month's Audio Rewind Puzzler, send your guesses to podcast@retrowdw.com. All right, well, it is time to get to our main topic, and as we said, this is part one of a two-part series entitled Polynesian Dreams. Tonight we're going to be taking you back to some of the original concept and ideas of the Polynesian resort, and Hal has been diligently researching this for at least 6, 7, 8, and maybe even 9 years. I don't know, more than that, but in the past 2 weeks, he's been going crazy. He's got papers. He asked us to scan things. He's looking for basically photos at 4,000 DPI scanned in so he can check every pixel for any abnormalities.
That's right.
And,
I needed to count hotel rooms on renderings.
That's right. So we are going to talk about design, a potential scuba tank inside the resort, and all sorts of wacky things that came out. But tell us a little bit about, we're going to turn the clocks way back and get started on this.
So, the idea for a Polynesian-style theme resort dates back to at least 1966, during the initial stages of the Florida project's master planning. So, at that point in the property's development, there's no Seven Seas Lagoon. The resort hotels are located just beyond a green belt containing golf courses and some lakes, kind of to the west, to the south, and the east of the theme park. So, if you think about the film that Walt made, it's that big long map that's up on the wall. It's like that's where this development is starting, kind of in the closed doors of WED. What's funny is at this point, the parking lot for the Magic Kingdom, holding 10,000 cars, is actually behind the park, not in front of it, which seems crazy.
Yeah. Now, do you think some of the idea for a Polynesian resort came out of the tiki culture, that post-war tiki culture that then materialized and turned Trader Vic's and all that? It was a big thing in the late 50s and early 60s. So
I assume it's got to come from some of that. I think they're looking for, when you're looking for concepts of, what do we do differently to sort of differentiate these hotels? I mean, even in all the documents that I read, they actually go through great pains to actually describe what a theme resort is, because that concept didn't really exist. And they keep saying things like, well, it's you take a park, or you take a resort hotel, and then all the costumes and the tables and the furniture and everything inside of it either falls around a single architectural style or a single theme. So they actually had to explain this idea to people. And I think they were looking for something that would be different, and certainly they had to build a lot of hotels, so you have to differentiate one hotel from the other. So I think picking something like a South Seas idea, there's definitely that desire to get away. Travel to Hawaii was starting to pick up in popularity in the 1950s, and it was popular before. Things like the Madsen line. I think there were some hotels that were starting to open up in Tahiti. So if there was an affordable way for, average mom and pop and the McFarkles to take an exotic vacation, but not actually have to, that's a great way to do it.
And I also think, too, is that Disney knew from their history at Disneyland that as soon as you put something up like this, you're bound to have hotels right outside the property pop up. So if you make them that much more different than everything else, they're going to entice people to come in. And again, with the whole tiki culture, I mean, I even remember in the late 70s, early 80s, going into Chinese restaurants that had the complete Polynesia treatment done, and that was kind of the first themed restaurants that came in the 60s, and it seems to be more of a cutover from that, an extension, if you will.
And it being part of a larger set of themed resorts, the Asian resort and the Venetian resort with the Italian Venice theming, and so on the drawing board, it probably didn't seem that crazy to have an all-encompassing island Polynesia type of resort. Plus, that was also the time period where they were working on the Tiki Room, and then expanding Adventureland with Pirates of the Caribbean and in Disneyland. So there was a lot of that stuff on the table, which I don't want to jump on Hal's
it's almost like
research here, but I'm sure some of that's going to be incorporated into why they went with that theme at that spot.
It could have been a world showcase of hotels.
That's and it's certainly possible that some of the ideas for the themes that were going on inside of the Magic Kingdom could spill out onto the outside too. So what's really funny is, so to the east of the Magic Kingdom, there were 2 hotels in kind of like a little pod, and both of them had extensive water features. They weren't connected to Bay Lake, but Bay Lake was actually like pushed way, way over, like almost by 1/3. Like they had intended to add almost like 1/3 more water over to Bay Lake to get it closer over to these 2 things. So what's really funny is when you're talking about themes, so there's 2 themed resorts that are going to have all this water stuff. One is the South Seas themed resort, which is on the south side of this, but on the north side is what's called the Early American theme resort, and that is situated on a man-made Cape Cod Bay. So you couldn't have more 2 things so different from each other, like adjacent. But I think really the concept behind this thing is they wanted to get water as part of the thing here. And as I talked about in some of our previous episodes, when they were setting this up as a resort facility, they knew that the Magic Kingdom would likely be a 1-day stop for a family, or potentially conventioneers. So they were always looking for things that you could do that would extend your vacation without having to go to the theme park multiple times, because it was, even back then, considered expensive. So one of the things that Harrison Buzz Price pointed out to them is like things like, boat rentals and horseback riding, those kind of additional type resort activities that were less expensive, could help give people things to do for multiple days while they were staying at Walt Disney World, since there was only one park then. So that's why they wanted to have these water activities, so like sailing and snorkeling and things like that in one spot. Now the layout of this style of resort is kind of hard to describe. We'll have pictures that you can see that'll make it a little better. But for those of you that don't have access to visuals right now, if you kind of picture a centralized parking lot leading into a main building, kind of overlooking three lagoons, and they kind of begin at the center and they spread out to the east and the west, forming sort of a half circle. Now from these lagoons, there are canals cut back. And so those canals go deeper into the property, away from the central lagoon. And then the hotel buildings kind of meander around the hotels and eventually connect to the main building. So what you have are kind of like a series of hotels radiating out like spikes. And then the hotel rooms are situated around those canals, so they're looking into the canals. So that way there's water views basically no matter where you are. And then you could perhaps get into the canals and go down to like the main body of water, or just walk down and take your stuff with you and participate in all those activities. Some of the other of the hotels amenities are like restaurants and things. And those are either located on the shores of the lagoon, or in the case of the restaurant, actually built on piers directly over the water. So it was, in concept, really, really neat. Now, there's not any renderings of what these buildings might have looked like. These are all plans just kind of done from a top level view. Just, I think, really kind of ideas and thought starters. So on October 27th, 1966, Walt films the now famous Epcot short film. And he's introducing the public to the concept of a Disney World, consisting of the theme parks, the hotels, the working city of the future that he calls Epcot. And in this movie, the positions of the early American themed and South Seas themed resorts have swapped. So now the early American resort is in the South and the South Seas one is in the North, which is kind of weird. But what's kind of interesting at this point is the Bay Lake waters now actually go right into the resort, and Bay Lake is intermingling with all these lagoons, are not separate anymore. So this concept that we see going on later on in River Country is kind of borne out here. Now, if you get a chance to watch the Epcot film, when Walt first appears on camera, these resorts are directly over his head, so you'll see him right away. And when he starts talking about the theme parks and the hotels being developed to serve the tourists, the camera pulls back and you can clearly see these resort complexes in the film. So put it on freeze frame. You can get a good look at them. It's really interesting.
Yeah, we've got a good, really well restored version of that on our website too. So
great.
Check it out.
Yeah. And at one point, Walt walks past a panel of 4 renderings of some of the resort's amenities. These will end up getting published later on, but you can actually see like a little picture of the shark lagoon and thing there. So this is 1966. Of course, Walt passes away in December of 66. And in 1967, then, the movie is shown to the public. And then a book called Project Florida, A Whole New Disney World. Todd, I think you have a copy of that.
I do, yes.
Yeah.
One of my favorites.
So in that, they published diagrams of the resorts with descriptions of the South Seas theme resort as being, quote, designed for enthusiasts of aquatic sports. So that's really where this whole thing is going. They're looking for something that appeals to the sportsman. And I think the South Seas theme being very water-based is then the natural way to kind of tie those things in together. So of the 3 lagoons, one's earmarked for swimming, one is for boating, and the other is a shark diving lagoon. So this idea of being able to dive with sharks actually stuck around through several iterations of the resort. And the concept art for that today actually hangs in the Polynesian resort in the first floor elevator lobby. So if you go down into the elevators, there's like a really big blow up of the art that was done for that. I think it was John Hench, but I'm not positive.
That's cool.
And it's very, very cool.
And again, old things don't die. Where did that eventually end up? Typhoon Lagoon?
Typhoon Lagoon. So how about that? There's another rendering that shows a concept for a water slide fed by a waterfall, which does get built, just not in kind of the same way. But yeah, I mean, they were really thinking of things that if they didn't show up at the hotel, they did end up showing up later on.
Well, and that's a huge draw too. I mean, if you think about hotels at the time, the pool was just a concrete square or a concrete rectangle, and one of those blue fiberglass slides that probably had no water running down it. You'd burn your bum going down, and that was it. So
yeah. And although the lagoon looks really small for water sports, I've actually seen several like smallish lagoons, like in the back of the Hawaiian Village Hotel on Oahu. There's actually like a little small lagoon where the people that do the rentals of like little sail cats and boats and things, it's like they're all in there kind of protected from the ocean. And even this is so strange, at that Celebrity Sports Center that Disney owned in the 1960s and 1970s, they actually had like large fans downstairs on the pool, and they would put kids in little sailboats and have them sail in the pool there.
Dick Nunes tested that, just so you know.
Yeah. So it's totally practical. So all these plans, though, would radically change in the fall of 1967. Borings and soil tests come back.
Yeah. And they decide instead of a parking lot to build Seven Seas Lagoon.
Right. Because the land that they had designated for all this stuff was actually unbuildable. So by the spring of 1968, they actually come up with the idea to build the Seven Seas Lagoon and finalize what that's going to look like. And all the resorts, before the resorts that were not water-based, were actually just going to be in little pods facing each other, so that way it'd facilitate getting to them by one-way people mover. Well, now the resorts are all spread out across the waterfront, and everybody's got a nice water view. So that's quite lovely. So around this time, Disney also contracts Welton Beckett and Associates to start designing the resort hotels. So they're getting from we know we're going to have some resorts, but we don't know what they are, to actually trying to put some hard designs down. Welton Beckett worked with Disney at the 64 World's Fair to design the Carousel of Progress building. And he was also good friends with Walt Disney, so it was probably just a real easy thing to hire them to do that. And it was more than WED could likely handle at the time. And WED wasn't really good at hotels. They had never done hotels. The Disneyland Hotel was owned by the Rather Corporation, so they just didn't have the logistics down of what you needed to be able to build a hotel. At that time, we see a new master plan, and what is now referred to as a Polynesian-style resort features a 12-story tower at its center with sweeping wings and a set of smaller lower buildings connected to the east and west, with a majority of buildings situated around a half-circle lagoon carved out, and approximately kind of where the ferry boats dock today at the Transportation and Ticket Center. Now, if you want to see this model, you can go to Michael Crawford's website, Progress City USA, and we'll include a link to that in the show notes. It's a really rare thing, and it was really cool for him to find that and publish it. And what's also kind of astounding is the other hotels being planned at this stage look nothing like any of the hotels that we know about that were going to be there. So like, you don't see the Asian, and it's like you have these very modern hotels that kind of look like a Fontainebleau and like just bizarre. So this tower design seems very unusual compared to the Polynesian resort that we've come to know and love. So to understand the style, I think what we have to do is look at what was going on at the same time in the real Polynesia, particularly in Hawaii, where for the first time, the Big Island of Hawaii and Maui were seeing development by large state-sized hotelers. And they were pushing bold modern designs that highlighted more of Hawaii's natural beauty than sort of the romanticized fantasy of grass shacks and things.
How does 90-degree angles show the beauty of Hawaii, though?
Well, a lot of these hotels were built up on, let me get into that. So the man who's probably most responsible for the trend is a guy named Pete Wembley. And he's from the architecture firm of Wembley, White Sand, Allison, and Tong. Now, they had built the Coco Palms Hotel on Kauai. That was famous for being the location of Elvis's 1961 movie, Blue Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And they also built the Hotel Bora Bora in Tahiti, which consisted of thatched huts perched on stilts over the water. Now, remember those two hotels, because when we're in part 2, we'll go back and reference those, because they kind of end up coming back again. But by the 1960s, Wembley was actually trying to explore new styles for a Hawaiian resort, rejecting the old grass shack style, and also the plain stacked boxes which sprang up on the shores of Waikiki and Oahu in the 1950s. His 1963 design of the Sheraton Maui Resort was the first to marry the idea of modernism and Hawaiian culture. And by January of 1968, the Kona Hilton was built with 192 rooms with a sloped tower, sort of epitomizing this ideal. So two things that he felt was really important was to try to use as much of the natural surrounding as possible. So if you were building a hotel on a rocky cliff, it's like you wanted to make sure that you could like raise the hotel high enough that people could actually get a great view of the water and also the surroundings around it. So his big thing was, take what was available in the area and, showcase the heck out of the natural beauty there, but still make the building as modern and classy as possible. And also to try to integrate some elements of Hawaiian culture into it. So this is the first time that you're seeing somebody not just like slapping up, just a generic hotel in the middle of an area out there, but actually trying to look at what's going on and integrate that with that. So
I find it interesting because some of the renderings, especially that black and white one that looks like you took a Aztec pyramid and you took a slice out of it,
right?
And I find it very interesting that it's so similar to what the contemporary is in a different way. To see something that's nearly identical, just in a different geometric form, I thought was interesting.
And that's really kind of the point that we'll get into. The Polynesian resort was not meant to be, like a bucolic vision of what Polynesia was or some kind of historical reproduction. It was always intended to be a very modern, of the now resort that happened to have some South Seas flair to it. What's really funny is if you look at the Kona Hilton, when I'll have to have some links to that too, it bears a very strong resemblance to what they were planning to build at Disney in this 1969 version. So if somebody, it's either a heck of a coincidence that both of the buildings ended up kind of looking the same way with the two wings coming out to the sides, or they pretty much took the basic idea and copied it. And it was a really successful hotel, this Kona Hilton. It cost $5 million to build in 1968, which was a boatload of money. It was 7 stories tall as opposed to the Polynesian's 12-story design at that point. But it was a smash success. It had an occupancy rate of over 85% in its first year, and it ended up setting the standard for future resort developments in the Hawaiian Islands for years and years. And that design group went on to do resort hotels not only all over Hawaii, but like all over Asia and the Pacific as well. It was really a smash hit. But let's get back to our Polynesian resort. So on April 30th, 1969, my first birthday, Walt Disney World held a press conference to show the public for the first time real specifics about what was being built at Disney World. The earlier ones were just kind of like, hey, we're here, we're going to do something, and let's have fun with this. So at the Ramada Inn Tower Hotel in Ocoee, they showed a huge model of the Walt Disney World project. And also they did a variety of press releases with their partners, and they distributed a lot of photographs and stuff to the reporters that were assembled from around the country. I think there was something like between 300 and 500 reporters that were flown in. So there were people from everywhere to come to look at this. So that day they showed a more detailed model of the property. And the Polynesian resort in that version was constructed mostly using the 1968 version of the hotel as a guide, but the configuration was now flipped. So the circular lagoon and the buildings were located to the west of the towers and the smaller buildings to the northeast, with views either overlooking the Seven Seas Lagoon or a bunch of man-made lagoons and pools that were inside the property. So this is what you'll see on the cover of like a lot of the pictorial souvenir guides where it's got the red roof.
What's interesting in the older rendition, when you had that crescent moon, it's very reminiscent of what the Copper Creek Canyon and also the bungalows are today.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting. It's taken all these years to get to what they may have originally envisioned.
Yeah. So the announcement that I think had the biggest effect on what would happen with this was the fact that U.S. Steel was partnering with Disney and Welton Beckett to build the hotels using modular construction. It's well known that the Contemporary was built with this technique. JT, what's the favorite phrase?
Like a chest of drawers.
That's right.
There we are.
But U.S. Steel was going to do the same thing with the Polynesian style resort, except instead of sliding them in, they would stack them up.
So what's our new like milk crates? What do we use here? We need a good.
It's like you may be familiar with the chest of drawers concept, but at the Polynesian we decided to stack them like milk crates.
We need something catchier.
Stack them like a U-Haul truck.
All right, this is a contest. Here's what we're going to do. You know how chest of drawers has caught on. So we want you to write in with your best ideas of how to describe stacking hotel rooms rather than sliding them in like a chest of drawers. So send in to podcast@retrodwdw.com, and who knows, you might be lucky enough to create the next metaphor for what we use on the show.
To me, the most interesting twist to this relationship with U.S. Steel and Disney is that U.S. Steel actually started a whole new unit of its company for the venture. The USS Realty Development Division contracted to lease the land from Disney. They were to own the hotels, but then they were to license the operation of the hotels back to a newly created company like within the Disney organization. And if you remember, like I said before, Disney didn't have any experience with hotels. The Rather Corporation owned the Disneyland Hotel, so They didn't have much expertise in hotel operations at the time, and really the whole point of this weird relationship was for Disney to have someone else finance the construction of the hotels, because they simply, were running out of cash and didn't know what to do. So they were hoping, U.S. Steel would pick up the bag and also, do the building, and they would just be able to run it.
And let's admit, U.S. Steel, we talked about this when we had the contemporary episode. They thought this was the wave of the future. They built these 2 hotels using this technique. And later on, they wound up producing some additional prefab things out of that facility, and I think eventually went into creating toilets and bathrooms or something like that as well. I think it didn't work out for them as they had planned either.
Yeah. So the press release that came out that day by U.S. Steel describes the Polynesian theme hotel as having a total of 1,090 rooms. Now that's more than the contemporary ended up with. So this would have been a huge project.
Yeah, that's massive.
250 of the hotel rooms would have a private garden patio. The other 840 would be identically constructed and located in the resort's annex facilities. So those are the ones that would have been churned out, each on the sort of the production line. Each room was promised a water view. So no matter what room you stayed at this hotel, you had a water view. There was no tier.
Wait a minute. So what did they get? Rooms on the back with just giant mirrors?
So the way that tower was configured, the elevator shaft was in the back. You would go up. So the parking lot that faced the back of the parking lot. So you would walk in, you would go up the elevator shaft, and then your hotel hallways would open up into the room, and then they would be a straight shot, like looking out at the water.
Just essentially if you cut the contemporary in half.
Basically, yeah. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And then all of the outbuildings would be configured in one direction or another to either point out to the lake or like some of the artificial water that they had built there. But this concept that you would see water everywhere was a big deal to them.
The Grand Volcano Concourse just has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
Well, actually, they may not have had a Grand Volcano Concourse, but they would have had a top of the world, because part of the plan was a South Seas dining room located at the top of the hotel. They also were going to have a scuba diving pool, so that idea, maybe without the sharks, was still hanging around, and a health club. And interesting, there's a one piece of artwork from that day, which I think we've all seen, because it also got turned into a postcard of 2 cranes flying over the property. And on that one, the longhouses are in a completely different configuration than the model that we see. They actually look like the longhouses that ended up getting built, and they're more or less situated where the ones that did get built ended up. So this might have been the first time when you start to see the reality of how U.S. Steel's construction would work with the Welton Beckett design, and they tried to find sort of like this halfway point. Right. One thing that does show up in both these plans, though, which is fascinating, is right on the water's edge are these private circular bungalows. So that was a concept that was actually went back as far as 1968, 1969, that didn't happen until just a couple of years ago.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So each of the unitized rooms were 29 feet long, 14 feet wide, and could sleep up to 5 people. The powder rooms were oversized by the day standards and included double sinks, which I think was pretty rare at the time.
Did you have to pay for the 5th person, though?
What was also really weird is, as Tom Nabby told us, and actually I've seen this reiterated in other hotel books too from the time period, is like the average family that stayed, like the average booking for a hotel back then was like 1.5 people. So all the stuff that was built, like the sizes of the waiting rooms and the ideas of the restaurants and all that stuff was built around that, even though the rooms were built to accommodate like much more people.
Yeah, that's right. He told us that about them ordering all the food, and the weights of the elevators and everything were based on this calculation, not taking into account that most hotels were used for business travelers or people visiting. The family vacations weren't what hotels were really built for back then, and so nobody said, well, we're encouraging mom and dad and the 2 kids to come, let's plan for that.
Yeah, I read something, and I don't want to talk about the contemporary, but they would say, I read something where they'd have like 1,000 people show up and expect to eat breakfast at like 8 a.m. And there's no capacity to do that, even in the early days.
It's really amazing too. The safety standards, obviously back then, not what they are today, but think about that. If you're basing it on 1.5, yet you have the theoretical capacity of 5 in every room. Not just the logistical, but you got massive safety hazard on your hands.
Well, it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So by time the booklet, a complete edition about Walt Disney World, and I think, Todd, you might have one of those too. I can't remember.
I do. In fact, I have the very rare version that still has the memo that's paper clipped to the very first page, encouraging people in the corporation whoever received this to pass it around because there's not many copies available. And
wow.
The paperclip is kind of rusted in. And it's a really cool little addition. I've never seen one that has the additional memo attached to it.
Cool.
Well, the rusty paperclip is historically significant.
It is.
Hal's going to create a drink at our next event called the Rusty
Paperclip. I like
Gosh,
that.
yes, please.
You will not get tetanus, we promise.
What a thing.
So in that particular pamphlet, the hotel is now officially billed as the Polynesian, the place to stay for sports enthusiasts. Kind of what I think you were talking about, Todd.
Can't claim that anymore because now it's the All-Star Sports Resort.
The number of rooms drops to 700, with roughly 1/3, so about 230 placed in the tower. But at least all 700 rooms are still promised the water view. So don't worry, the water view's still there, at least for the next 5 minutes. But by the end of 1969, plans for that hotel changed radically. Although the tower version of the Polynesian is still shown in some publications, when you read text descriptions and look at illustrations that are sort of deeper in the reports, you get a description for a completely different kind of resort. In the 1969 Disney Annual Report, the corporate one, the total number of rooms at the Polynesian are now down to 508, and it's described as a, quote, low-rise vacation village design. The Polynesian's main dining room was to overlook a skin diving and water sports grotto, but the rooms are now said to either look across the lagoon to the Magic Kingdom theme park or toward Walt Disney World's golf course complex. And this is when we first start to see, what we know as the Great Ceremonial House, and these like long houses that were kind of roughed in that other design now starting to come together.
And the top of the world that they had became the Papipe Veranda. So
yeah,
instead of being 17 stories up where it was, we're now 2.
it's 2. In the 1970 preview edition of the Walt Disney World Pictorial Souvenir, that thing that was distributed at the Preview Center, it's still got the big tower on the cover. I guess that model must have been like too good to give up.
Well, was that also too, were they going to even the model at the Preview Center? Did they redo the physical model?
I don't think they did at that point.
Yeah,
no,
so I mean,
we
you're going
actually
to print and hand things out that match.
So now we see for the first time a colored line drawing of what we know as the Great Ceremonial House at the center of the property, with the rectangular marina to the east, and the longhouses with the hotel rooms arranged kind of on a grid system to the east and west of the main lobby. The description says it's a little more subdued now. They say guests will play tennis under the palms, swim in tropical pools with cascading waterfalls, lounge in the sun on white sandy beaches, or go sailing practically from the doorstep of the rooms. Golfers may warm up on a huge shoreline putting green. So it seems like all of the grandeur of the resort plans were slipping away, either as a result of financial burden, or maybe the technical limitations of the modular construction techniques, or just maybe the deadline to have the resort open in the fourth quarter of 1971. So, Brian, I know you know a little bit about the U.S. Steel relationship and how that ended up going sour. So could you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so really, as they started to work on the Polynesian, actually both hotels, the pacing was not going right. A lot of stuff was not going right. And as Walt often did with his early vendors at Disneyland, when something wasn't working out, they would just take it over. And so there was a point where they elected to take the project over from U.S. Steel and finish the 2 hotels, bringing in their own third-party vendor to finish the job. At the same time, it's probably worth mentioning, you already mentioned they had no experience running hotels. So Disney's solution to this was to lease the Holiday Inn out on 192, I think it was. And they put Sully Sullivan in charge of it. They told him, go learn how to run a hotel. So they hired some hotel industry guys to work with the Disney people. And they spent something like, I think they had a total of 18 months to run the thing. And Disney put their people out there to try to figure out how to run the kitchen and run the housekeeping and run the front desk and figure out how to run a hotel. And then they moved all those people over to the Polynesian and the Contemporary. And then the Holiday Inn people, the guy that owned the Holiday Inn, ended up suing them, saying that they were losing money on purpose and had spent a bunch of money by sending the housekeepers and caterers and all out to the 5 houses that they owned in Bay Hill, where Roy Disney and Joe Fowler and those guys all had houses when they would come to town. So there's a whole little legal back and forth that went on there after the fact. But so they basically, their solution to figuring out the hotel industry was to lease a hotel and run it for 18 months.
Yeah. So finally in 1971, sometime, the resort gets an official name, the Polynesian Village. Amazingly, the site had been cleaned and prepped for at least a year, but construction on the resort didn't actually begin until February of 1971.
That's a miracle. I mean, they had guests 7 months later.
Here's the crazy thing. It was actually complete in August of 71, 4 months.
Wow.
Now, that's probably due to the fact that the Great Ceremonial House, including that building that houses the lobby and the restaurants and the adjacent Outrigger Assembly House that has the retail space and more restaurants, they're just big empty steel boxes. I mean, there's not a lot going on.
Just coat it in asbestos and you're done, right? I mean, that's
you put it in the ground floor, throw some stuff in, and it's good to go. But really, maybe it was the prefabricated hotel rooms being stacked in place by cranes that really made that go quick, because 4 months is astounding.
Well, if you think, I mean, how we don't know how quickly they were churning those rooms out, and what the Contemporary was, what condition it was in by the time they started that. So that whole thing making the rooms could have been wrapped up, and those rooms may have been even further finished than the ones at the Contemporary. I mean, remember they always say all you have to do is plug in the plumbing and the electricity.
I've seen a picture of the facility where they built the rooms that has what looks like 500 units like sitting outside, like ready to get trucked away.
Yeah.
So.
And we shared photos sent to us by one of our listeners a few months back on Twitter of he got into the DC-6 building where they built those rooms, which is still on property, and the rail tracks that they used to wheel them out of the building facility and load them onto the truck to run them over to either the Contemporary or the Polynesian. Those rail tracks are still in the ground in that building from when they built that. And so there's he points out a couple of spots where they are on the thing. So we sent some stills of that out. We'll have to add them to the article for the episode.
There's a great photo of the construction where it's one of the famous, or I shouldn't say famous, but the one that circulated on the internet a lot. It's a black and white one. I'll share it with you guys. We'll include it in the notes. I mean, and if you look at it, I mean, there is really no other support structure when you think about it. There's all the rooms are stacked in the foreground, and they're literally just dropping these things in place like Lego. So there's your cue right there, how in the foreground, those are all the rooms ready to go. That isn't a long building.
Yeah.
That's the cue.
I think really all they had to do was, attach them together, like run the hallway between them.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the hallway was part of it, and then stick the roof on top.
Exactly.
But it was probably quite elegant and simple to do that. And as we've talked about, the rooms were fully furnished. The wallpaper was on, the furniture was in place. It was like they hooked up the power, they hooked up the plumbing, and that was it.
I think Nabby went so far as to tell us the toiletries were like the bars of soap and shampoo. It was all ready to go. Like they just literally just had to plug it in.
And one of the things that I just read, because I think we had talked about, like, what about the lamps and things? Because when did that all get shuck around? And they actually didn't have any freestanding lamps or desk lamps in the rooms when they first debuted. All of the lighting was either canned in the ceiling or behind the bed and then shot like indirectly from behind the bed onto the ceiling and down. Yep. And they actually got a bunch of complaints about that when the resort opened because people weren't used to it. Apparently, whoever designed the room, they were kind of freaked out about things like, you know, they were used to seeing like dirty lampshades and things in hotels. So they were trying to avoid all of that by using all this newfangled lighting and stuff. And it sounds like it was a really cool idea.
Yeah.
But,
and let's also, too, remember that there were only, 6 longhouses originally? Right? Is that what it was?
8, actually.
8, okay. So
yeah.
Not the, 12 that we have today?
Yeah, so, it was much smaller.
So smaller, yeah.
Yeah.
And there is a big difference if people want to know. If you walk the newer ones, which are now some of the DVC, you can tell the difference because actually the hallway width is completely different. They were built to different standards. So if you ever walk like I think Pago Pago or something like that, compare that to Hawaii or it used to be called Bora Bora, the real small one. Hallways are extremely narrow, but if you go into the ones that were built in the later 70s, much wider.
So to your point, when the Polynesian Village Resort finally opened, it had 6 suites and 478 guest rooms, spread across 8 longhouses with names like Tahiti, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Hawaii, Bora Bora, Maui, and for no particular reason, Bali High.
Which was that was the suites, right?
I think so, yeah. So they were all named after islands, with the exception of one that was named after a mythological place from the musical South Pacific, which probably would have been well known to everyone at that time, but today makes probably not much sense to everyone. It didn't have a pool that you could swim with sharks in, but it did have a pretty cool swimming pool and a golf putting green in the back. And I guess that probably had a lot to do with the constricted timeline, but it was still a beautiful resort.
So Bali High, was the only building that was not built using the chest of drawers technique. So if you look at the construction, it's the suites, and there's a couple construction photos, especially in the Magic of Walt Disney World book or whatever it is, where you can see it's a standard stick frame construction inside with a steel outer shell. So Bali High did differ because it was built differently, and it featured the suites and not the regular guest rooms.
I think there's one where you actually can look down into it before the roof's been put on, right?
Yes, yeah. That's the one I'm referring to, which is it's from the book you mentioned earlier.
All right, so next time in part 2 of the show, we'll explore the hotel's features. We'll talk about its design philosophy, including its smiling mascot, one of my favorite things. And we'll also highlight some of the food and drink you would have experienced at the resort. And then we'll discuss how it's expanded and changed several times from 1971 to the present.
And we're also working on getting some special guests that, let's say they had some performances and they did some things at the resort. We're not going to get into too much detail, but we're going to work to get them on the show as well. So it should be an interesting one.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of entertainment going on there.
That's right. And to our listeners, this is a great opportunity. We don't do 2-part episodes a lot, and this is a great opportunity. Hopefully, we whet your appetite here for more, and you're going to have questions. So please write in anything specific that you want to hear to podcast at retrowdw.com, and we'll definitely talk about it and see if we can get that information out to you. So thank you very much, Hal. Appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to next month and see what else you uncover, and ultimately talk about the original lava pool, because I remember being there. Asbestos and the smell of the lobby we'll talk about, right?
The lobby.
That's right. All right. So with that, before we wrap up, we always like to talk a little bit about the different things that we offer. As you know, on RetroWW.com, we've got some films. We talked about one earlier tonight. You'll see The Eastern Winds, which used to moor over at the Polynesian Resort. So it's definitely take a look. And we've got some other ones. Over the Christmas holiday, we did release The Pageantry and Glory of Christmas. Art and Linda made their re-debut and came back. And believe it or not, guys, there's still more Art and Linda yet to be unveiled.
We're still looking for them and to solve that mystery.
That's true. We are. So... all right, and as always, we'd like to talk about some of the merchandise that we have at our shop. So you can go to retrowdw.com/support us. Now, how we added a few things for the holidays. We put the Epcot ornament back in, and you also had what we titled Ugly EO. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit Ugly EO? I know it's past the holiday season, and we'll see what else you have in store, but tell them what Ugly EO is.
Well, hopefully people will find this for next Christmas then, because we kind of dropped that one in at the end.
Yeah.
So, right now the ugly sweater thing is all the rage. So
much so that Brian just loves that part of Christmas, the ugly sweater, right, Brian?
I am morally opposed to it.
Yeah. You know what? I get where you're coming from. It's like at one point I'm sure it was funny to like raid your parents' closet and pull out sweaters that were actually
ugly,
out of fashion,
yeah,
and wear them places, but now it's just turned into this whole sort of cottage industry in and amongst itself.
But nevertheless, we joined that bandwagon.
That's right. Let's ride that wave machine right to the shore.
There it is.
So yes, you can. So you can. You will find a design with Michael Jackson as Captain EO, all done in thread, with the special holiday message: "We are here to change the world."
That's right.
So that's make a lovely addition to your holiday attire.
Now, don't feel that you have to order these 9-10 months in advance, because Hal is not sitting there actually crafting each one out of thread. They are silkscreen printed, so let's just get that straight. That Hal doesn't crochet or knit or anything in his spare time. So,
but if you want to order it now, that's fine too.
Yeah, you can order it.
Well, with
Christmas in July.
That's right.
That's right. Oh yeah, Christmas in July. Well, with this being the Polynesian episode, I absolutely have to do some Polynesian designs because, let's face it, that's one of my favorite things anyway, and there's plenty of historical nooks and crannies to explore here. So,
and don't forget to our listeners, we already have the Wave Machine shirt, which is one of our best-selling T-shirts ever.
Still one of my favorites.
And I have one. We pre-distressed it to look like the imprint has gone through the wash many times. Mine is distressing even more, and it just looks double awesome because it was pre-distressed and now it is distressed. It's fading fast, and I love it. So. Check out the Newness Wave Machine T-shirt. It's one of the best. So who knows? Maybe Hal will come up with something with Bob around, something with the great.
Oh man, Bob! There's so many great stuff.
Yeah.
There was Trader Jack's upstairs. That was their liquor store. We had Bob Around boats. There's so much material to work from.
How about a torch? Just a torch on it.
Yeah,
gas lamp torch. So, all right. Well, Hal will be looking for your latest designs, and we'll get those up there as soon as possible. So check it out at retrowdw.com/support us. All right, guys. So with that, we know where we're going next month. We're coming back to the Polynesian for part 2. And with that, I want to thank all of our listeners, as always, for tuning in and listening to us. If you can, give us a shout out on iTunes or Google Play or wherever you listen to us. And again, if you have any questions, comments, give us a shout at podcast@retrowdw.com. And don't forget our audio line. You can leave us a message at 978-71-RETRO. You've got up to 2 minutes to tell us a little bit about what you've got going on or what you remember about Disney. Send us your memories, and we'll see to get you on the air. So, all right. Well, aloha, everybody, from the South Seas, and we'll see you next month. And with that, Brian, take us out.
Follow Todd McCartney and Retro WDW on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Retro WDW. For all things Retro Disney World, including exclusive merchandise, visit us on the web at retrowdw.com. On Twitter, follow our web designer Jason Bartell of Deepwater Studios at JasonDWS, our announcer Andre Gardner at Andre Gardner, and follow our hosts Hal Bowers on Twitter and Instagram at GoAwayGreen, and on the web at kingdomofmemories.com. For JT Kuzer on Twitter at LS1JT, on YouTube at Rubber City Motoring, and on the web at rubbercitymotoring.com. And you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Brian P. Miles.